Okay, and I'll keep admitting people as they come. So, good afternoon, everyone, and it's great to be here today. My name is Christian Harrison, and I'm privileged to be facilitating the research seminar series of the business school or the School of Business and Creative Industries. And we've had this seminars, it's going to 2 years now, wow. And it's been well attended, great. We've had great speakers over time, and we're going to have a very fabulous speaker today. No pressure, Claire, but it's a very interesting topic. For those of you that like Disney, for those of you that want to know much about the Mouse House, for those of you that have been to Florida, we have a former cast member, but I'll be introducing her later. But either way, so we're going to be having a very interesting seminar today. Like I've said, the ground rules for Zoom. Please mute yourself while you're not talking. Feel free to use your videos if you want to as well. It's, of course, if there is, it's totally virtual. And if you need to go out, please feel free. It's not a life or death affair. So if there's an emergency in your house, you can leave your computer and you can leave us and come back. But it's great to have everybody here today. And like I said, please feel free to introduce yourself via the chat, because it'd be great to know where you are all logging from. So today we'll be looking at the ethnographic study into the reality of being a cast member at the Mouse House. And I would like to say a special thank you to Dr. Claire Hookham. When I approached her to do this, she said she was going to be here today. And she didn't even think too much about it. And I'm so grateful for that. And she's here, and she has, of course, fulfilled her promise. And I'm sure you're going to have a great one today. I'll still try to admit people as they come. So, before, like I said, we'll be looking at the ethnographic study, and it's going to be looking at the Mouse House. You want to know about the corporate culture, especially what's happening in today's world. Why are these businesses very successful? What has made Disney one of the greatest brands in the world? Is it their culture? Is it those ingredients? We have somebody that has worked there, and she'll give us a clear picture of how Disney looks like. For those of you that have been there, you're going to get a better, of course, a better analogy of how it looks like. But what I'll be doing in the next few seconds is also to introduce Claire. So I stole Claire's biography, so Claire, apologies, but I just try to make it very concise, because I know it's quite big. But Claire Hookham is a senior lecturer in organizational behavior and human resource management at Leeds Trinity University, Leeds Trinity University Business School. She has a wealth of experience in academic leadership, management consultancy, leadership creative learning, teaching and assessment strategies within the business school. Claire is, of course, you already know, a former Walt Disney cast member, and often uses her experience at Disney within her lectures and academic research. I can't wait. I wish I was a student and I was in our class, because that's going to be fantastic. Since we talked about Disney, but let's leave that aside. Her PhD in management studies focus on the creation and standardization of Disney's corporate culture and the management of employees through emotional labor methods. Alongside her teaching and research, Claire, of course, is a special advisor to the Management Knowledge and Education Subcommittee for the British Academy of Management. We have worked together over the years on BAM, and we did a very great conference that, of course, that was the brainchild of Claire as well. And she's a member of CAPS, also within the Teaching and Student Experience Committee, and an advisory member of the Enterprise Educators UK. Claire's academic qualifications includes a PhD, an MBA, a BA, and is also a senior fellow of the Higher Education Academy, and she's also a certified management and business educator of CAPS. So that is a slight snapshot of the seasoned expert we have in the house today. So I don't want to talk too much, because I think I talk too much. So I will let Claire start the talking. So Claire will present, and after that, as you already know, you would ask Claire some questions. So thanks very much, Claire.
Thank you, Christian. Gosh, I feel like I've got quite a lot to live up to there. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Yes, as Christian said, you know my name and you know my background, and the focus today is me talking about being a cast member at Walt Disney World and how that really was the fieldwork aspect of my ethnographic PhD studies. So it's a little bit longer ago than I'd like to admit. So we're coming up to 20 years since I actually completed the fieldwork aspect of the PhD. And that was written up and presented for Viva in 2010, 2011. So that was quite a while ago that the fieldwork actually happened, but I've continued to research the company. And as Christian said, I build that into lots of my teaching. So, believe it or not, there's still an incredible amount of currency in the fieldwork in terms of the rich ethnographic style, but also the content as well. And actually, that's one of the things that I will be focusing on in the talk, that a lot of the standardization of the way in which Walt Disney World cast members are recruited, trained and retained actually is resultant directly of Walt Disney, who, actually died in 1969, 1970. So, still his methods are continuing, which is why, although the fieldwork might be 20 years old, I could just go and do this now. And I dare say it would be a very, very similar experience. So I'm going to try and share my screen. The reason I say try is that my university is a Teams user, not a Zoom user. So Christian, can you just confirm that you can see that, please?
Yes, Claire.
And can I just, while I've got you, can I just check that it's gone on to the next slide as well?
Perfect, yes.
Perfect. Okay. So when I'm in this view, I can't actually see any of you, so I won't be able to see any hands up or any questions. So Christian, can I leave it to you to interject if you need to ask questions or anything? Is that okay?
Great, good plan.
Brilliant. Thank you. So my plan is to talk probably for about 45 minutes. I actually could probably talk about this for the next 3 years. So you may need to reel me in at times and go, okay, shall we move on to the next thing? Because I really do want to give you an overview of not only what it's like to be a Walt Disney World cast member, but also what I've done with it in an academic sense in terms of, how did I turn this from essentially a piece of travel writing into a PhD? And I will preface all of this with the fact that the simple reason that the whole reason I did any of this was so for the rest of my life I could claim to have a Mickey Mouse PhD. So I'll continue with that one. I'll leave that one with you. So let's move on and have a little look. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the Disney tale, about how it came to be, a little bit of an insight into the backstage culture of the Walt Disney World Company, the onstage culture, a little bit of deviation and deviance from the culture that the cast members do. And I'll explain a little bit about it as well. And you'll notice that I always refer to Disney cast members rather than employees. And that's due to the theatrical terminology that the company use constantly. So everything has theatrical terminology. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But just so you know, it doesn't mean that I was a character or was in a show when I refer to myself as a cast member. I was an employee, but everything has to be a little bit Disney, a little bit extra, as I think the youth of today would describe it as. So I'm going to talk about becoming a Disney cast member. I'm going to be talking about the everyday kind of ritualistic behavior.
Just call and let me know.
Are you okay, Christian? I think you're not on mute. Okay.
I think it was somebody else. The person has muted himself.
Christian?
I think it was somebody, but don't worry, you can continue.
Okay, are you there? Can I continue? Is that all right?
Yeah, continue.
Brilliant. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the everyday ritualistic behavioural norms and practices that Disney train cast members to do and how that becomes a part of their being. And actually they use those emotional control methods, so emotional labour control methods. So cast members are buying into the corporate culture and actually embodying that in their day-to-day work. And a lot of the day-to-day work is pretty mundane. It's working as a waiter or waitress in a restaurant, it's working as a bartender, it's working in a shop, it's working as a ride attendant, it's working as a character attendant, looking after the characters. But it's how Disney cast members embody this corporate culture and actually espouse the organisational culture constantly. So they constantly reference Walt Disney quotations, different language that really is Disney parlance. It's not really real in the real world, but it becomes part of it because Disney creates this microcosm of a real world when you work at Disney World. I'm also going to talk a little bit about taking part in sub or countercultural beliefs and rites of passage and values and ritualistic behaviour. But before I do that, let me just kind of bed this in terms of the research methodology that I selected to use. Obviously, I've alluded to the fact that this was an ethnography. Now, I'm going to work on the presumption that most people on the call might know what ethnography is. For those maybe non-academics or people who are new to this world, ethnography basically means writing about a lived experience and attributing academic theory to it. And from that, creating our own academic theories, which then can be applied and used. So it's taking a very real experience. So you could do an ethnography of being a nurse, you could do an ethnography of working in HR, as long as you are using some academic references to kind of articulate what the importance of that is. So I'm a big fan of Professor John Van Manen at MIT, if anyone's aware of his work. I really like his work because not only his research methodology is very, very similar to the methodology that I like using, but also he's a former Disney cast member. Now, he's a former Disney cast member at Disneyland in California, which was the original Disney theme park. And he was actually working there at the time that Walt Disney was alive and walking around. So his tales, obviously he's got a little bit more to add to that story than unfortunately I could have going in the early 2000s. However, our tales are still very, very similar. And I've had the privilege to meet John on a few occasions. And when we share our experiences of being a cast member, they're very, very similar, even though one was in California, one was in Florida, one was in the 50s, one was in the early 2000s. So John has created a book which was called Tales from the Field, where he suggests that in order to use an ethnographic methodology, you need to consider three key facets. First one is field work, so to go out there and have the experience. So for this, I chose to use a covert participant observant ethnography, which meant that I was fully engaged in the field. I didn't stand there with a clipboard kind of noting down everything that happened. I actually lived it. So I went through the recruitment process. I was a Disney cast member. And within field work, John Van Manen suggests that you should keep notes, which I did on everything. I wrote on little tiny scraps of paper on the back of my check pad when I was a waitress. I kept them everywhere, took photographs of everything and just collected as much information as I can. So any sort of ephemera, documents, flyers, bits of information that came from the company, printouts of changes to the organisation, newspaper clips, anything that could provide that very rich lived-in experience that arguably only a true cast member could have. Obviously, it then comes with the challenge of staying academic so that I didn't go too native. But again, I'll come back to that bit again. Then after fieldwork, Van Manen suggests that we move on to the head work. So once you leave the field, or it can be done in parallel, you have the process of kind of making your experience very academic. So the head work is looking at what other Disney academics say. Now, my research encapsulated different areas that I needed to do head work. So I had the Disney history itself, so the history of the Walt Disney Company, ethnography as a research methodology, because obviously I was writing this up as a PhD, so I needed to kind of qualify the methodological stance in which I took. But also, and importantly, the so what question, what am I going to do with this? What is this telling us about management studies? What is this telling us about corporate cultural control? So the head work was very much about looking at other Disney scholars. And to be quite frank, in the early 2000s, the field of Disney scholarship was relatively limited. So there weren't that many for me to go. Alan Bryman did some good stuff, Janet Vasco, and of course, John Van Manen himself, amongst others. So I was looking at all those things before then coming to the third aspect of Van Manen's suggested research methodology in terms of ethnography, and that's the text work. So that's the writing things up, making sense of things and theorizing. Okay, this has been great, what a fantastic experience. It either completely agrees with what the Disney scholar says or completely goes against it, but that's the joy of ethnography. So what now? What are you going to do with it? And that's when I created my own frameworks, a typology of different cast members, and how this could be utilized. This standardization of training could be utilized in other organizations. And of course, answering the research questions. So all these things are happening simultaneously to me, really, whilst I was having this fieldwork experience, to ensure that I knew exactly what I was doing. So let me tell you a little bit about the fieldwork aspect of it. And this is kind of the Disney story. So this is me. As you know, PhD from the University of Liverpool in this. The title of what I'm about to present to you was called 47 Square Miles of Globalization, an ethnography of skin close emotional labour control methods at Walt Disney World. 47 square miles alludes to the square mileage of the Walt Disney World Resort, which is the same size as San Francisco, twice the size of Manhattan Island. So it's a huge area of which Disney have total control. They have created a microcosm of an entire world, an entire country, an entire well, I don't know what you want to call it, but its own kind of set of rules and regulations. It even has some of its own laws, which is why they're allowed to get away with things that they're allowed to get away with, because there's such a huge employer in the Central Florida area. So within that 47 square miles, there is a series of global initiatives. So when the Disney managers say to cast members, we've got a new global initiative, which basically means we've got a new way of doing something. And it could be something incredibly strategic for the company, or it could even be how to deliver coffee. Believe it or not, we did have a global initiative on how to deliver coffee. But when they say global, they don't actually mean the entire Walt Disney Company across the actual physical world. They mean across the 47 square miles of Walt Disney World. So global to them. So this was a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek snipe at them, calling themselves a global community, which is 47 square miles. And of course, these skin close control methods, which is a direct John Van Manen quotation. So that's just to kind of give you the grounding. And then I thought it was also nice to give you a picture of the reality of me. So that's me as a Disney adult, again, before being a Disney adult was a thing, before Primark had the license to sell all the Disney stuff. I was way ahead of the curve there. And I can often be found at Disney parks, because I get that question a lot, you know, despite being a Disney cast member, despite seeing all the backstage stuff and knowing how the magic works, do I still love it? I absolutely still love it. And I still love going to all the parks. I've been to all of them around the world, and I will continue to do so. So where did I work? As you know, I worked in Walt Disney World, which is made up of 4 theme parks. The Magic Kingdom, which is the first one, that's the one with the castle and the princesses and the parade and the balloons and the candy floss and everything that you probably think of when you think of Disney World. The second theme park to be created was Epcot, which actually started as an acronym for Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow. And Walt's idea for this was that he'd created Disneyland in California, which, as I've said, was the first Disney theme park. When he came to create Florida, he had the joy of lots of land, as you know, 47 square miles of it. So not only did he want to create a replica, or in Disney terms, a cookie cutter version of Disneyland, because he knew that was the cash cow. So again, putting that in management scholarship terms, that was the cash cow. That's where everybody would flood. That's where all the kids would come and want the toys and spend lots of money on a huge amount of markup on candy floss and Coca-Cola. But what he also wanted to do was have a bit of fun with the area, and he actually wanted to create a real life community, which would be very utopian. And at one stage, his drawings even had a glass dome covering this utopian community. So all nature could be controlled, the weather could be controlled, and the climate. And it would be this perfect world in which all the young people would live in the centre, all the ones who were still in the labour market and could still actively contribute. And as soon as they retired, they would then move out to the outer edges of Epcot. They could still contribute, but in very different ways. There would be monorails going. It was very, very futuristic. Everything that Walt Disney did was incredibly futuristic. He was fascinated by telecommunication, by space travel, by the world in itself. He really was genuinely very innocent and very childlike in his strategies and his ways. Whereas his brother Roy, who was his older brother, was very money-minded. So you may argue that one was right-brained, one was left-brained. And actually, in those days on the management team, you had Walt men or Roy men. There were no women in the senior leadership team, of course, in those days. And the Roy men were very, yes, this is the maths. No, we can't afford it. Whereas the Walt men were like, put another turret on the castle. Roy will never know. And if it's already built, he's going to have to find the money for it. So this, you're kind of getting a glimpse of the sometimes the disparity between the organisation of what they want to achieve creatively versus what they know corporately and managerially what they can afford. But Walt Disney died before even Walt Disney World, the Magic Kingdom, was open. So his idea of Epcot never came to fruition. And in fact, the Florida site of Walt Disney World, the Magic Kingdom, was so popular that the Disney executives decided they wanted to extend the stay of the average guest. So they would come to the Magic Kingdom maybe for 2 days and stay in a cheap motel on the area. But what the Disney executive thought is, we've got all this space, we're making loads of money in the Magic Kingdom, but they're going onto like the cheap motels and they're going to the tacky tourist stores. Why don't we create another theme park so actually they can spend double the amount of days there, which in turn means double the amount of food, on drink, on merchandise, and spending time on the rides, etc. So Epcot was created. So the idea of a utopian community was then turned into a showcase of the world. So this is the park map of which you'll see the left-hand side, which is the Interventions and the Millennium Central. This is called Tomorrowland, and this is very much about the future. So it's about telecommunications, it's about testing out new cars. There's a mission to Mars space travel ride that you can go and you can learn about ecology. So it's very, very educational, but very interesting for kids. And they always have some really exciting stuff there. So my husband always remembers when he went there as a kid, it was the first time he'd ever played on a PlayStation. And he always pestered his parents to take him to Epcot. So he just wanted to sit and play on the PlayStation. It was also the first time I'd ever tried the Segway moving machines. So they always get everything first, and it's quite an interesting place. But the second part, and this is where our story is really going to take place, is around the World Showcase. So the World Showcase is created on a person-made lagoon, the World Showcase Lagoon, and there are 11 different countries represented on here. And each country has a pavilion, which is about the size of maybe a small cul-de-sac of houses. So it's not a huge site, but it's enough to have maybe a restaurant, some shops. Some of the pavilions have a ride, and the idea is that the 2.5 miles around it, actually you get the experience of walking the world. You've visited 11 different countries, 11 different cultures throughout your day at Epcot. In order to work in any of those pavilions, you have to be native to the country you're representing. So they import all the international program members from the countries they're representing. And as you can imagine, it's hugely competitive to get in. And once you're there, you are a cultural representative. And that's just an insight as well into that kind of the language that Disney using for that emotional labor, that you're not just an employee, or you're not just a British employee brought in to work in a shop or work in a restaurant. You are a cultural representative on the international program, representing your country and your culture. So they really do kind of flower up the importance of that. And then within each pavilion, each one is separate. So as you can imagine, I worked in the UK pavilion. It has two sides to it. So there's a merchandise side, which has architecture, as you can see from the photograph on the bottom, very, very turn of the last century. So very Mary Poppins era, with Anne Hathaway's cottage, of course, William Shakespeare's wife, Hampton Court. They even have one of the York bars, which, as you can tell from my accent, is close to my house. I'm from Yorkshire. Very Tudor style. It's your archetypal view of what Britain is like. So very Mary Poppins, very Winnie the Pooh, very much a picture book view. And they sell British gifts, so they sell Cadbury's chocolates. They do actually sell shortbread for all our Scottish friends out there. They sell football kits as well as Disney merchandise as well. So they sell all the British characters merchandise in there, and Winnie the Pooh comes to visit and you can have your photograph taken with him. They have like a Beatles type band playing, and they have World Showcase players, which is like a traveling band of actors who go around each of the World Showcase and stop in each pavilion at different times of the day and do like a comedy act. So in the UK, it was like the Tale of King Arthur. On the other side of the pavilion, which is where I worked, was the food and beverage. And there's the Rose and Crown dining room and pub. There's a beer cart, there's the Yorkshire County Fish and Chip shop. And within the pub, there was a lady called Pam Brodie, who only very recently passed away, who dressed as a pearly queen and would be singing Knees Up Mother Brown and on Ilkley More Batat and things like that. And she'd get the audience involved. And it's this idea that it's very much the view of the UK. So in order to work there, the recruitment process is very long, it's very drawn out, but very importantly, it's like no other recruitment process I had ever been through or subsequently been through, because actually at the very first stage, there was the sense that this Disney corporate culture was going to be so important that it was in every aspect of what we were doing. So first of all, you have to send a CV and a photograph. Now, anybody who teaches HRM or has studied human resources will be absolutely shocked and horrified by that. That, of course, how can we possibly ask somebody to send a photograph? And this was what I was talking about when I said Disney kind of have their own rules. And Disney's rules are that when you are recruited as a cast member, you are there to play the role. You are there to play the role of a British person in the UK pavilion. So Disney have to see how you look to decide whether you look intrinsically British. Luckily for me, I did. So I got through to the next round. I'm still not quite sure on what criterion they used to judge whether I looked British or not, but apparently I did. And they use a procurement ally as well. So they basically use a recruitment consultancy in the UK to do all the first sifting of CVs and presumably to check that people look British and their photograph. And to do the first round of telephone interviews. But really interestingly, the recruitment consultancies that they use are all independent from the Disney company, yet are all former Disney cast members who worked on the international programme. And of course, the reason for that is that those cast members or former cast members know exactly what they're looking for. So I had the telephone interview, but immediately the questions were things like, if a guest asked you, what's the most important thing about your culture, what would you say? If a guest asked you, what's the best dish of your culture, what would you say? And what they were looking for was that I was speaking in very positive language, that I didn't answer the question of, British food is just disgusting. Like everything is bland. We're not really known for anything except fish and chips, and who wants fried fish and, greasy potatoes and things. But actually that we were saying, well, do you know what? We're a really cultural diverse nation. We really enjoy the fusion of lots of different countries' food. However, I suppose we really are famous for fish and chips, which of course you'll see in lots of movies. And so you kind of talking in this Disney storytelling idea all the time, because although they want the guests to have a true representation of traveling the world in the day, they want them all to have had a great time, and that every country was an experience for them, and that they're not leaving thinking, well, I'm never going to France or I'm never going to Germany because that was awful, but actually we're really highlighting the best bits. And within there was a few questions that really could have maybe derailed a few people. So questions such as, what do you think happened to Princess Diana? And of course, lots of British people have an opinion on what happened to Princess Diana in terms of how she died. And any connections that would happen. But of course, the set answer is it was just a tragic accident. We're just so grateful that we had her as Queen of Hearts, and that, her legacy will live on through her children, who one day one of them will be our king. So, you're not focusing on the negative. There's always a positive way to come out of that. You're then invited down to Disney headquarters, which is in Hammersmith in London, and the whole day is just like Disney throws up on you. So there's Disney music playing in the lifts, there's Disney sing-along on every screen that you pass, and Disney cast members are dotted around the room to make sure that you are enjoying the experience, and that actually you're not subverting their culture, that you're not laughing at things going, oh, this is so cringe, this is awful, this is dreadful, what on earth am I doing here? And they would select people from the audience who were doing that to leave before they even had their face-to-face interview, just to leave immediately. They also did a little bit of audience participation, again, to make sure that Disney cast members have got the ability to follow direction and to follow the Disney corporate culture. And one of the things that they teach you is the Disney point. And from the photograph, you'll see that we're doing the two versions of the Disney point. First Disney point is 2 fingers, because the idea is that to point with 1 finger in most cultures is incredibly rude. So you must never point with 1 finger at Disney. It's either 2 or 3 finger gesture as such, or an open palm sweeping gesture. So you'll see on the photograph, I'm doing an open palm sweeping gesture. And I'm not sure if anyone's clocked who that gentleman is, but that's actually Professor John Van Manen. And we were at a conference together, and our greeting to each other is the Disney point. So we captured that lovely moment of doing the Disney point. So once I got through that, then obviously do all the stuff that happens beforehand, visas, trip down to London to get my visa and things like that. But the arrival process begins pre-arrival, where you get sent a book of cultural differences that you have to memorize and that you're tested on when you arrive, which is socializing you into the American culture. Now, I didn't think the American culture was that different from ours, but there were some shocks. You know, it would say things like, if you go on a date in America, do not expect it to end in marriage. It could just be a social or friendship event. So it was kind of, you do wonder who this was written for, but nonetheless, it ticked the box to get you ready for presumably they thought there was going to be a big culture shock. You know, spoiler alert, there wasn't. But every part of the process of arrival is managed. You're collected from the airport. You have to wear an identifying Mickey Mouse badge. You are taken immediately to a Disney lecture hall where you have to sign all your contracts. At this point, I'd been awake 18, maybe 19 hours, and you still have to sign everything. You sign to say that if you know of a piece of land that's for sale around the Central Florida area, that you won't buy it, that you will tell Disney so they can expand their kingdom. That you won't give away any of the Disney secrets whilst you work there. Luckily, I'm out of contract. And that anything that you create whilst being a Disney cast member, even if it's in your own time, with your own money, with your own products, it still belongs to Disney. And the key example of this is when Tim Burton created the Nightmare Before Christmas movie. He was officially under contract to Disney, but he was just about to leave and had begun production of that. They now own that. That's Disney's Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas. So they take this very seriously. Obviously, I don't think they'd really care about, I don't know, little bits of cross stitch or colour by numbers that I was doing. That's no threat to their animation industry, but certainly Tim Burton was seen as a huge threat as a current and then former Disney cast member. You're given your ID card, taken to your apartment. I'm going to talk a little bit more later about the apartment. And then the next morning, you have more cultural training. And the cultural training is about how not to offend people. And the reason they do this is because this is the kind of the grounding of all Disney training, that you must never offend or make anybody feel awkward. So they will present to you a selection of awkward situations, and it's about how you as a Disney cast member get out of those situations. And this was about living with your roommates. So when you work at Disney and you do the international program, you're not allowed to live with anybody from the same culture. So I lived with a girl from Japan, a girl from France, a girl from America. Again, you would think the American and I would have lots in common, but actually she was the one who struggled with the cultural differences the most. But again, if we've got time, I'll tell you a few stories about her. But they were teaching us about cultural differences, and they taught you set phrases that you had to memorize and then perform in front of people. So it was a very performative time, and it really was, you know, the drama student in me really came out at this stage. So you'd have a Disney facilitator who would say, you know, I won't do the accent, but when you live with lots of people from different cultures, they are likely to be preparing cuisines from their own culture, which may not be similar to your taste. So rather than going in to your apartment going, oh, what is that you're cooking? It absolutely stinks. You have got to say, what an interesting aroma. Please tell me a little bit about what you've chosen to cook for dinner this evening and how it forms an integral part of your culture. I mean, seriously, I really don't think we were ever going to say that, but that's what we had to learn. And that's 20 years, well, it's 19 years and 11 months since I went through that training, and I can still remember that sentence because that's how many times we had to regurgitate it until we got it right. I never used it. I would say, Steph, that smells absolutely disgusting, what is it? And she'd say, you need to taste it, and I said, actually it's all right. You know, the reality is that there was a certain level of surface acting. And again, when we come to the academic stuff, you'll see I use a lot of Ali Hochschild's managed heart, where there's that surface acting of faking it until you make it. So whilst you're in that lecture hall, I can totally fake this and go, that's an interesting aroma, but knowing I'm never going to use it. But I could be convincing. And then you get told about the dress code. Then you get sent to the Disney University. It's a real place, folks. I've been there and I've graduated from it. It's not like a normal university, obviously. It's not a university that we all know and love. It's a corporate training ground. In America, the term university isn't a protected term. So that's why they're allowed to class it as that. Essentially, it's a building. Outside, it just looks like a warehouse. Inside, it's truly magical. It's full of beautiful models and ornaments and posters and motivational quotes all around the Disney heritage and history. It's really something quite special. But every Disney cast member has to go through the traditions class. Now, the traditions class is where they teach you the history of the company. They teach you again about the Disney point, not that we all wouldn't have remembered that, and also how to do the Disney smile, which I'll come to, and their corporate values of, you know, what's important to them and what every Disney cast member must go through. Now, as I say, every cast member has to do this, whether you're a janitor, whether you're cleaning the bathrooms, right up to the chief executive officer. Everybody has to go through Disney traditions. And if you leave the organization, you have to re-go through Disney traditions to kind of get that hearts and mind and really be, I'm trying to avoid the word indoctrinated back into the culture. So let's go re-socialized back into the culture. And it's led by a Disney facilitator. And Disney facilitators are existing cast members who work in other areas of Walt Disney World. So they may be ride attendants, they may be waitresses, you know, they'll do anything else. But also because they've been deemed as a good cast member and one that are embodying the Disney culture, they are therefore allowed to teach new cast members. So they teach you about the history, but it's all done within a storytelling theoretical way. So rather than just saying, this is what we want you to do, this is how we want you to act, they say, let me tell you about a story of a little boy who once came to the Magic Kingdom and was desperately upset that he didn't meet Mickey Mouse. A cast member found him crying and she asked him what the problem was, and he explained that he travelled 6,000 miles to meet Mickey Mouse and he was going home on that day and he didn't have any other time, but he'd missed the parade and all these things. And that cast member went backstage and found Mickey Mouse and brought him to that little boy, and they had a wonderful one-to-one meet and greet, and the mum was happy, she was crying, the child got the autograph and the photograph, and Mickey even brought a little plush toy, so that little boy would always remember that. So the way that they tell that story is so you know that Disney cast members are expected to exceed guest expectations. It's not enough to say, oh, Mickey Mouse comes out at 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock. If you want to meet him, queue up with the rest of them and do it. But actually, there was extenuating circumstances. That cast member had gone over and above to get Mickey. The cast member who was friends with Mickey, which is Disney parlance for wears a big foam head, also brought the little toy. So that Disney cast member had gone over and above. And then the story continues that 20 years later, that little boy grew up knowing that that Disney magic was part of his soul, wanted to be a Disney cast member himself, came to sit in the Disney University. And ladies and gentlemen, that Disney cast member was me, your facilitator. So then there's the idea that in order to be part of Disney, it will be with you forever. It goes on. And so it's very saccharine sweet. There was a lot of ironic eye rolling from the British cast members, but obviously not to be seen by the cast members who were teaching us or the facilitators. But it was constant. Everything they teach you is through this storytelling methodology, and that's one of the aspects that I teach to, and mainly my master's students, when we're talking about the importance of storytelling, to actually create a narrative and to how that works best with the memories, because it's echoic of the fairy tales that we heard as children, and we're used to that format. And actually, that's the way in which we can run facilitate corporate training, by telling a story, and people will remember that, and therefore they'll remember the point of the story, a bit like Aesop's fables. They also teach you how to smile. So it's not just your mentality of being a Disney cast member, but it's the physicality of being a Disney cast member as well. That you don't just smile kind of like that, but you use your whole eyes. So all Disney characters are known for their big eyes, their big smiley eyes, and their big smiley mouths. And they teach you to bite the back of your tongue with your back teeth, and your whole face lights up when you smile. And for extra cuteness, you're meant to tilt your head as well. So the idea is that if you cover your mouth, you will be able to tell if you're smiling or not. You'll see, bit weird, isn't it? But that's the idea, that you're able to do that. And of course, everybody has to do that. And the Disney facilitator walks around and says, not quite perfected it yet. Go to the bathroom, look in the mirror, come back when you've perfected it. They then move on in the afternoon to tell you about Disney philosophy. And this is really the customer service element of being a Disney cast member. Disney state that their key competitors are anybody who has customers. So it's not anybody who runs theme parks, it's not anybody who has animation studios, it's anybody who serves customers. Disney want to be the best at any guest interaction. So this is why they have such strong corporate philosophy. Now, it used to be safety, courtesy, efficiency, show. It's since been updated within the last year, actually, to be 5 keys. When I was there, it was 4 pillars, but it's now 5 keys. So they've still kept safety, courtesy, show, and efficiency, but they've now quite rightly and brilliantly added inclusion as well. There's still a little bit of a debate of the order in which those kind of principles for being a Disney cast member should go. Arguably, if you're not being inclusive, there's not much else you can do. So maybe safety could always come first, and then inclusion should be a very close second. I think they're still arguing about that one, but for the time being, these are the keys that they're using. So this is what they're teaching at the Disney University. In order to be a proper cast member, you will abide by these 5 keys, and your manager will ask you at any time. So when I was there, it'd be like, Claire, what are the 4 pillars? And I'd say safety, courtesy, efficiency, show. Okay, give me an example of that. Safety, making sure that I don't leave a chair out that a guest could fall over, that I sweep up any peas so a guest doesn't skip on it. Good. Courtesy, make sure that I greet every guest with a smile, that I say hello, that I seek out guest contact. So if no guest is looking at me, I have to find a guest to talk to, and then they remember me as being a positive cast member. Good, Claire, well done. Next, show. Okay, to remember that we are all part of a show and everything must be clean and tidy at every point. That if I'm walking past a piece of litter, it's my job to pick it up, even though I'm not a janitor. Everybody must keep things clean and tidy. I must actively be looking for a job to do to make sure the Walt Disney World property is clean and tidy at all times, because this is a magical show. Well done, Claire. Next, efficiency. This efficiency would be to make sure that I'm not wasting any of our products. So when I'm pouring a Diet Coke, I only put the glass under. I put the glass under before I press the button for the Coke to come down. I don't remove the glass until the Coke's finished coming out, because otherwise it will drip down. If I pour a pint of beer and it's too frothy, I make sure that I tilt the glass so the froth comes to the top rather than leaving it to pour to drip down. Well done, Claire, you're a good cast member. So that's what we would go through. And each time the manager had to ask you, you had to have a different set of examples. And it could be at any time. It didn't have to be in kind of a formal review. It could just be you were serving a table, you were rushing into the kitchen, you were getting some napkins. It'd be like, Claire, give me an example of safety, courtesy, efficiency, show. And you had to do that immediately. They also taught you about the guest service guidelines. Now, these were tiny cards, almost a little bit bigger than credit card size. And every cast member had to keep these in their pockets during their first 30 days to make sure that they'd memorize them. After 30 days, you had to memorize them all. And again, at any time, a manager could say, tell me 4 of the guest service guidelines. Tell me 2 of the guest service guidelines, or today, Claire, I want at the end of your shift to tell me how you achieved 3 of these guest service guidelines. And they would keep a little chart on what we'd done. And they're basically just they are guest service guidelines. As it says, the guidelines are make eye contact and smile. So always be seeking that out. Greet and welcome each and every guest. Now, each of the different country pavilions took that to the next level, that they would have their own greetings. So if you went to Germany, they greeted you in a certain way. If they went to the Italian pavilion, they would greet you in a different way. In the UK pavilion, we had to do that, and it was well, it changed the whole time I was there, but we had a series of good morning mate, and we were all a bit like, we're really uncomfortable to do that because we won't call a guest mate. And cheers, when they left, instead of saying thank you, we had to go cheers mate, or cheers, and kind of like tip as if we had a, tip our hat as if we had a hat, or salute them. Seriously, it was straight. It was Bert the chimney sweep from Mary Poppins who designed that, I'm sure of it. Again, seek out guest contact. So I've spoken a bit about that one. So there's no idle time. There should be no time at which you're standing around. If you've got nothing to do, either find something to do, go tidy, go clean, or go and talk to a guest, go talk to a child, make somebody's day. Provide immediate service recovery. So if you're walking past someone and they drop their ice cream, you go to the ice cream stall, you get the ice cream, you give it to the guest, and then you sort out the paperwork of why you need to give a complimentary ice cream. There's no qualms about giving anything away for free. If it makes the guest happy, you're allowed to do it. So a guest might come, Pandora bracelet snapped at the table. Then you organise for a cast member to go to the front of the park where they sell Pandora to get her a new bracelet and 7 new charms to put on it. And again, if she had 7 charms on the bracelet, bring her 9. We're going to exceed that guest expectation. We're going to fix the problem, and then we're going to do the added extra. Walt Disney used to call that plussing. So it's that extra thing. So don't just give them what they expect, give them that little bit more as well. Display appropriate body language at all times, which means, again, the performance aspect. So Goffmanian theories on the presentation of self in everyday life here, that we present ourselves with open body language, open hand gestures, that we're never displaying negative body language, looking down, slouching. And as a Disney cast member, you're never allowed to lean on anything. You have to be standing upright, independent at all times. You can't lean on the back of a chair. You can't lean on when you kind of check guests in. You're not allowed to lean on the podium in front of you. You have to be freestanding at all times. Preserve the magical guest experience basically means that guests will continually try to get you to talk about how many Mickey Mouses there are. How can Mickey be in Epcot and then be in Magic Kingdom? Well, the reality is pixie dust, of course. So you're never allowed to say where the costumes are stored, how you become a character, the training that they go through. As far as anyone's concerned, you as a Disney cast member firmly believe that those characters are real, that this is a magical world. We never talk about politics. We never talk about money. We never talk about what we did last night. We certainly never reference the fact that we are so hungover we can't even see in front of us. But that magical experience has to happen, because the idea is everybody's on holiday. Everybody's paid thousands upon thousands of pounds to be here. They don't care about any problems of the world. They're there to forget it. And of course, thank each and every guest, which I think is just a standard guest service. So again, within the Disney University, they teach you to preserve the show of the place. So again, tidying up all the time and cleaning, but also the look. So there's a Disney look, and they dictate everything that we wear, obviously through our costumes, or we might call them uniforms. And you'll see the guy at the top with the glasses. You'll see it right at the bottom. There's a barcode on the bottom of his shirt. Now, his shirt should be tucked in, but I can tell by the way the chairs are that was after park close. So there was no guests around. And the reason for that is that every piece of clothing that Disney give you have a barcode on, so they can scan you in and out to not only check that you're wearing all the components of the set costume for your country that you're representing, but also they know how many versions of each one you've got, and then they'll know if you've stolen any of it. The Disney name tags, really interesting. In fact, Disney were the first company in the world ever to use Disney name tags. To use name tags or name badges. And Walt's idea was that everybody should be approachable. Lost children should be able to approach a cast member using their name. Disney only ever used first names. Walt very famously said the only Misters in Disneyland are Mr. Toad and Mr. Smee, which of course are character names. So everybody, even to Walt, Michael Eisner, who was the CEO when I worked there, we just referred to him as Michael. So they're very, very informal in that way, but you have to wear a Disney name badge. So if you've forgotten your name badge that day, there's actually 2 drawers. One is a drawer full of Pat name badges, and the other is a drawer full of Chris name badges, because obviously they're androgynous names. So if you ever go to Disney World and you see a Pat or a Chris, you ask them if it's their real name or if they forgot their name badge that day. So you'll never see a cast member without a name badge on. They also teach you theatrical language. So as I've been talking about cast members, costumes, any area that a guest can see is on stage, any area that a guest can't see is off stage or backstage. And that's pretty crummy. It's not well maintained. It's, very uneven pavements. All the money is spent, quite rightly, in the guest areas. So this is really important, that you've been a Disney cast member, and you've been through all this recruitment process, and you've been in Central Florida, and you've been to the Disney University, but you haven't yet started your job, because the way in which Disney train their cast members is that being a Disney cast member is the most important part of the role. So you could pick up a Disney cast member and turn them into a waitress within a day. Pick up a Disney cast member, turn them into a ride operator within a day. That the actual mechanics of the job role are really not important. It's the person who embodies the whole Disney spirit. So within that, there's the notion that Walt Disney came up with, that everything talks, that every part of the company, every part of Disney World, every building, every floor, every shop, every piece of cutlery has a story behind it. Why is it that way? And everything talks to all of your senses. So as you're going between the different countries within the World Showcase, the first thing that changes is the ground. So you don't notice around you that you've changed, but apparently psychologists have told the Disney company that if your feet sense a change of terrain, so obviously when you walk into the UK pavilion, it's cobbles, you go, oh, this is something a bit different. I must be in a different country now. I've gone from the French pavilion, which is the one next to the UK. I'm different now. I must be going into a different country. But of course, there's a story that goes with that. So even the Rose and Crown dining room and pub, which is where I worked, each room in the pub has a completely different story of, oh, well, this was the famous dart room. In here, John Fitzgerald used to come and play darts in 1954. This is a true replica of a pub in Gloucester. It wasn't. It was just made up by the Disney company. But as cast members, you had to learn each of the stories for each of the areas. Then if a guest says, is this true to Britain? Absolutely. Yeah, this is so close. I actually feel like I'm coming home every time I come to work every day. So nothing is left to chance. Everything is scripted and everything has a backstory. There's a reason for everything. So if you think of Main Street USA, so just hop over to the Magic Kingdom for a second. At the top of we have the castle, which is the main event. But as you're walking in, the whole theme park design is designed like a movie. So as you're walking into the theme park, you go under a tunnel where there's a train line that goes above, and there's posters for all the rides that you're going to ride that day. Well, that's like the trailers. If you think of the movie analogy, you're watching the trailers as what to come. Soon as you step foot into the Magic Kingdom, the first thing that you will smell is candy floss and popcorn, which is obviously like the concession stand at going to the movie theatre. And you think, that's amazing. Should we get some popcorn? And there's the links to childhood. There's the excitement of the sugar and the excitement of the day. And it's like, yeah, it's only 8 a.m., but who don't want candy floss at 8 a.m.? The reality is, yes, they do sell candy floss and popcorn, but they pump that smell in. They make that smell happen. So it's a full sensory experience. And they have little green mushroom speakers hidden in all the foliage to pump out the Disney music. And the BGM, the background music, is all symbolic of the era. So the Main Street USA is obviously turn of the century 1900s Missouri, where Walt Disney grew up. So it's very it's very kind of tuneful, and you don't really know what the song is, but you feel like you're there. And then as you're walking up Main Street, because of course America Drive on the right, you naturally walk up the right hand side. All the shops on the right-hand side are providing things that you need for that day. So in the day, you could get camera film, camera batteries. You can still print digital photos there, hats, sun cream, anything that you might need to prepare you for the day. You go, you have your magical day. As you're leaving the park, again, down the right, so at this picture, the left-hand side, is the big emporium, is all the merchandise stuff, because they know as you're leaving, first of all, you're going to want to walk through the shop. So right from the top of Main Street USA right to the bottom, you can walk through all those shops. You don't have to come on the outside. So you get an air conditioning because you're shattered. You've had a long day and it's Central Florida. It's very, very hot and sticky. So you want the air conditioning. Of course, while you're in there, your child's going to be, please, can I get a Mickey Mouse toy? Please, can I get a princess dress? You're going to be buying things before you leave. So it's very, very cleverly written. But yet just to look at a guest, just to look at Main Street, you go, oh, isn't this pretty? And there's much, I mean, I do a whole lecture on the creation of the Disney theme parks, because actually they use forced perspective. So it's meant to look so much bigger, but the reality is each building is separated into threes. The top is actually much, much smaller, and the middle bit gets a little bit wider, and the tallest part is the bottom. So it makes it look like you've got these huge buildings, but actually, if you look, the perspective is very, very different to give that view. So I'll move on a little bit. There's also a notion, and this was brought in by Michael Eisner, who, I'm just checking time, Christian. I'll be finishing soon. Michael Eisner was the chief executive, as I've said, when I worked there. And while they were creating the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was a part animated, part live action movie, as you can see there, with Bob Hoskins as the lead character. While they were animating that, Michael Eisner was very clear that attention to detail was the most important thing. When he saw a preview of the movie, there's a scene where Roger and Bob Hoskins are together, and Bob Hoskins jumps up, bumps his head on the lamp, and he kind of comes down all dazed, and the lamp's swinging and shadows go across his face. Roger Rabbit in the very next scene does the same. He jumps up, bumps his head, the lamp's swinging, he comes down all dazed. But Michael Eisner spotted that there were no shadows going across Roger Rabbit's face. So he said, stop, absolutely go back and reanimate that scene, because our competitors will spot that Disney have made a mistake, and we don't want to give them any reason for thinking we are anything but perfect. So that whole scene was taken out, reanimated, and put into place. But the term bump in the lamp then became something that they teach at the Disney University, and it means attention to detail. So managers would say, at the end of the shift, we would have to clean up the restaurant. We'd stay between an hour and a half after the guests have left, and we had to clean that restaurant as if it was brand new. And then before we were allowed to leave, the managers would come, and if it was the outside area, because obviously all the lights would be turned off, they have a torch and they would scan under each of the table, and there might be the odd pea, the garden pea, because of course we serve fish and chips or garden peas, and they would say, Claire, there's a pea under that table, don't forget to bump the lamp, pick up that pea. So it was always the attention to detail. And as I said earlier, Walt Disney liked to plus things, that everything was that little added extra. And every part of it being a Disney cast member was that excellence was expected. You absolutely, you have to be excellent, but you must exceed guest expectations. So, you might walk away and think, oh, that was really nice. Our waitress was so lovely. She was so kind. She brought us another drink. She did all this. And lots of guests would say to the manager, oh, she was so lovely. That was brilliant. And the manager would say, yep, that's her job. Whereas you've got to do something extra. So as a cast member, that's relatively exhausting. And there are just some photographs of, again, you can see the costume that I wore. So the photograph on the left is outside the Rose and Crown pub. So two guys on the international program with me on the right, our manager in the middle. And then on the right hand side, this was actually the Christmas Day parade at Walt Disney World the year that I was there, and I was selected to very genuinely fly the flag for the UK as on the Walt Disney World parade, which was quite sweet. I'm not going to have time to go into all of this, I'm afraid, because time has run away with us. And I did tell you I've been talking about this for 20 years, so I could keep going on, but I'll stop, because I really would like to have some nice conversations about this as well. But suffice to say that your site-specific training, so your on-the-job stuff, is just as strict and just as regulated as the Disney University stuff, as is your home life. So again, that's regulated to who you live with, who you share with. Disney executives would come in and check our apartments while we were at work. So they would check that it was clean. They would check that we had fruit and vegetables in the fridge, that our washing had been done, that it was ironed, that our costumes were hung up in an orderly fashion. And again, I always say to my first year students when I'm teaching Fordism and all that stuff, you know, it's literally like the Ford Sociological Society, you know, checking bank accounts to make sure you've got enough money, checking you've had a bath on a weekly basis, checking you're going to church and things like that. So, and you know, the bank account at Disney is Vista, where you have a Vista bank card that your Disney wage is paid into. You can only have the Disney bank account for it to be going into. So there's loads of other things that I would love to talk about. With this corporate culture, as you can imagine, this really strong corporate culture comes deviation and in a lot of cases deviance by the cast members, but it's all very subversive and it really happens behind. And I called it taking the mickey, and you know, I'm not even ashamed of the pun. Pun was totally and utterly intended here. But the deviance that the Disney cast members show in the real world would just be like, well, that's pretty pathetic and lame and childish. So, for example, I told you that Epcot stood for Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow. Disney cast members call it Experimental Polyester Costumes of Torture, because they were really itchy and would always leave a burn mark on our collars. Or Every Paycheck Comes on Thursday, because cast members get paid on Thursday. Or Every Parent Carries Out Tot, because it's such a long way to walk that everybody ends up carrying their kids out. So there were loads of things that happened, and also lots of subcultural rituals and rites of passage that were exclusive to each of the different nations. So you would do things when people left. So because everybody was on kind of a rolling contract, people were arriving every month, therefore leaving every month. So this is one of the rituals that we do, and this is backstage, and you can even see what the front of the UK pavilion looks like. This is the backstage area. You can see there's a cast member there, not in costume, with a cigarette. That is me in costume, because I was in the middle of the shift and one of my best friends was leaving. So I do a speech about him. You talk about all the fun things that you've done. So very, very much about the corporate culture. But still, you notice that after being there for 12 months, you do start using Disney terminology. Obviously, I didn't lose my accent, but I started finding that I used American words, but with a British accent, because it was just easier. And again, the deviant side of things, again, lots of things I could tell you about this, but one of them was that because they're always trying to make things better, Disney were always trying to develop the menu, and they wanted to develop a new fruit and cheese board, and they wanted a British cheese. So we all got together and agreed that we'd enter the polls. It was a pad and pen then, and we would all write on that the best cheese in the UK was Dairy Lee, which I don't know if anybody doesn't know what Dairy Lee is, but Dairy Lee is just a synthetic cheese spread, a bit like Philadelphia, relatively cheap. Kids like it on toast. It's by no means an exclusive cheese at all. But Disney were like, oh, this is amazing. We've got really good insight. They were pitching it to the executives. Yeah, we've utilized our market. We've talked to these people, and Dairy Lee is the way forward. And then they went to order some, and we all got into trouble for that. There's, just to kind of tie up this section, the legend of Walt Disney is around all the time. Everybody talks about Walt Disney as if he is going to walk through the door at any given time. There's quotations displayed both on stage and off stage. They even use the term, what would Walt do? What would Walt say if he saw you slouching? What would Walt say if he saw you with such negative body language? What would he feel? So it's very crazy, but it's also a very celebratory culture. So everything was celebrated. We have parties for the start of summer, parties because it rained that day. You know, we do a little rain dance, parties because a new movie was coming out. It was very celebratory and actually a very Disney experience. So very briefly then, we move into the kind of the academic side of it, the head works. You'll remember that I said Van Manen talked about field work, head work, text work. The head work was going to the literature. So as I said, Disney scholarship wasn't as big as it is now when I was doing mine. So there wasn't that much about the Disney company in an academic sense. There was even less that were written by former Disney cast members. So of all those ones that I've put on there, there's only John Van Manen's Tales to the Field, who was a former Disney cast member. Everybody else is writing from an outsider's perspective. And that really was the value added stuff that I think got me through my PhD, that not only was it such a rich ethnography, but there wasn't really much in the field at the time as well. But as you know, I've alluded to Goffman and the presentation of self in everyday life, the managed heart. Obviously, a lot of her work was around cabin crew and how they fake it to make it and smile, but it's very much surface acting. So this was all the grounding of my theory, and then what I created. And then the text work element was, what did I do with this? How did I turn this experience, which was transformational in terms of my life for many professional and personal reasons, but also academically. So I looked at ethnography as a research methodology. So, how did I stop myself going native? How did I stop thinking that it was perfectly normal for my male boss to ask to check the colour of my bra strap to make sure that it was tonal to my outfit? That he asked me to raise the bottom of my skirt to check that I had full hosiery on rather than just the knee-high tights. How did that ever not become weird? Or how did it, how did that happen? Because people would just do it unquestionably. How did that become okay? So I talk a lot about that in the PhD, and again have a whole section, a whole lecture on that as well. I also looked at this notion of, in terms of management studies, of organizations controlling emotions. So there's the way in which they standardize all recruitment or training or management, and how everybody has the same expectations. I also looked at the role of national versus corporate culture and how that blended, and how cast members dealt with the very Americanized view of a corporate culture, and this insistence on standardization, that everybody will say these set phrases, everybody will use a storytelling methodology when they're regurgitating a tale, whether it to be guests, whether they're Disney facilitators, whether they're training somebody, that everybody must perform in this way. And finally, I created a cast member typology. So I created almost levels of cast members. So you had cast members like me who knew that they were there for a finite amount of time. I knew I was only there for 12 months. I was on an international program. That was the length of my visa. I actually ended up being there for 15 months. They asked me to stay on and extended my visa. So I did have a little bit longer, but I knew that I could never be there forever unless I got a green card or I married an American. So it was finite for me. Whereas, and I went and lived with Disney cast members. I socialized with other British people all the time. Yet there are, of course, Disney cast members who just go, do their 8 hours a day, go home to their real families in a real house, not in a fully controlled community. So I really looked at how do they manage this Disney corporate culture, and how did they regurgitate the Disney way? And then obviously that pulled into I came up with terminology such as a believing faker, which meant somebody who kind of believed in the corporate culture but was able to completely fake it, or a disbelieving faker. Now, my husband also worked there. He's a disbelieving faker. So he doesn't believe for a second that Disney is magical. He just thinks it's this huge company with loads of money that are very, very clever at training people, very, very good at what they do in terms of their animation and the creation of theme parks, but it's not really real. But if you were served by him as a guest and he was your cast member in the Rose and Crown dining room, you would think he was the most magical cast member in the world. You would think that him and Mickey Mouse were best friends, that on his day off he was in the theme park, that he spent all his money there, that, he talked in this Disney language at home. The reality is that was me. I'm that type of cast member, but he very, very much wasn't. So the typology I created was looking at lifers, so people who have Disney as a career, versus kind of the temporary or finite cast members, and to what extent they embed or embody and espouse the Disney culture. So, folks, I'm going to leave it there. Christian, I think I've rumbled on a little bit more than was intended within the allotted time. Hopefully, people are still there and not bored yet.
like you said, Claire, like you can talk about this for 3 years, so I wasn't surprised. Thank you so much. It was very, very elaborate. It was very engaging, very interesting. Of course, 1 or 2 people also left as well, but they had to leave because they had meetings. So thanks. I found it very, very useful, very interesting. Not surprised, really. And it was great to see what you had done all through in Disney. Very interesting research. And it's when you even spoke about cast members, I didn't even know what you meant, but now I get it better. You meant an employee. So all those kind of words, the acronyms are used, specific things, and it made it very engaging. And this is what ethnography is all about, talking about your lived experience and the way you've been able to say it. and make it easy. And being able to apply your research into your teaching is also one of the things that makes you stand out. So well done, and thank you so much. But what I will do is I will let people ask you questions, because I know people want to ask you questions in the next few minutes. So I have Alexandra.
Hello, Claire. Thank you so much. This is so fascinating. I would really would love to keep listening and definitely attend some of your lectures, because this is so rich. And yes, I think we'll need to just have you back at some point. But I've got two questions. One is quick. So one is about asking you personally, how at the time did you feel about the culture of, in terms of the home life and the ways of living and operating? Did you feel that was checking on a bank account, checking how clean is your house and so on? Did it feel like this is a culture of care or intrusion?
I think my particular story was, so the time in my life that I'd just completed my MBA, and I'd always wanted to work at Disney since I was 11, and going to work there just because I had a personal interest, not only in Disney from let's go to Disney World, this is fun, but throughout my MBA I'd studied a little bit more about the company, and I was really intrigued, and I was desperate to kind of live it. So I just finished university there. I didn't think I would take my education any further. I didn't think I'd be doing a PhD. I thought it was just going to be like my gap year, because I hadn't had a gap year previously. It was before I then came back, and I was going to be a HR director. I was going to get a grown-up job. So actually I knew that I was only going for 12 months and that I might never live in America again. And that I felt incredibly privileged, because for every one role that there are 80 people who go for the role. So I felt very privileged to get to be a Disney cast member. And I was adamant that while I was there, I was going to take every single opportunity that was afforded to me. And actually, if they wanted to check my bank account or my apartment, so be it. I was good with money. I used money for travel. I spent a lot of it back in the Disney theme parks. I traveled a lot of America, the Bahamas, Jamaica. I went all over while I was a Disney cast member, and my apartment was always clean, and I never really broke the rules. So actually I didn't really care, because it was only finite. I knew it was only 12 months. And actually, just before I went to Florida, it was actually my MBA graduation, and my supervisor at the time said to me, "What are you going to do when you get back from Disney?" And I was like, "I think I'm going to go into HR." And he was like, "Why don't you do a PhD?" And I was like, "Oh God, I can't do any more. I can't do any more studying. Like, I'm nearly 23. I've been in formal education since I was 4, like enough." And he was like, "You would be silly to waste this opportunity of such a rich piece of field work and not do anything with it." So he then sent me loads of journal articles about ethnography. He sent me John van Maanen's book. And then I was like, oh, the competitive side of me was like, how cool would it be to have a PhD in Disney? Yes, please. So then actually the culture for me then was also kind of my academic brain going, this will be so cool to write up. Like, oh, can you imagine what my external examiner is going to think to that? So to that extent, I really didn't care. I had friends who did, they really minded about it, but they never lasted the duration of their program. They get sent home for doing silly things. So I guess I didn't matter. I could stay academic enough to acknowledge that it absolutely was control, and I know what they were doing, but I also know the more I played their game, the more I got into it. So for example, because I was seen as a good cast member, I was selected to represent them on the Walt Disney World Christmas Day Parade, which is a pretty cool thing to do, really. And I had lots of experiences like that. Former US presidents would come and I would be able to help serve them and things like that. So again, the better I was, the more experiences I had.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, what was the second part of your question?
Yes, and the second part quickly, because I did see a lot of hands, but it was about, really you described that elements of control so brilliantly, but in a way, under that sort of storytelling culture, it's all very subtle. And I think that goes so much hand in hand in terms of the perfection and actually playing it, creating experience. And I think it fits very much in that environment. But I'm just thinking whether you actually have any sort of follow-up research recently, because we've moved on, you've done this bit of work some time ago, and I wonder whether you have any insight in terms of how the values within the Disney itself change, or whether the program or approach change, because we are more and more talking about authentic experiences at work, the values that are very much about a kind of note taking, but actually living truly and being able to create a space for employees or cast members or performers, so they can actually be themselves.
Yeah, I think, but as I said at the start, it doesn't really change very much at Disney. So the experience that I had in the early 2000s was very similar to the one that John Van Manen had in the 50s, because it doesn't change, because they've standardized the way in which they do it. And obviously the Disney stories that they use are still there. They're still using those. The most recent piece of research has been looking at their values. So when they put inclusivity into the values, I was looking at that. Most of it is being through lectures. So I will bespoke it to that week. So if I'm teaching about inclusive labour methods or something, then that will form part of it, as opposed to writing it up. There's two pieces of research I would like to do that would be most recent. One of them is looking at the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the international programme, because actually for almost 2.5 years, they didn't have international cast members. They sent them all home, and then they all had to reapply. And it will be interesting to know how things have changed, because they do have international cast members back. I'm actually going to Florida on a family holiday in August, so I'm going to take some time to chat to the UK cast members and find out what their information is. To get some information and find out what their experience is and how it does differ from mine that 20 years on. The second one is a little bit like Doctors Across Borders. I want to look at Disney Across Borders and how they've developed the theme park experience and the training of cast members throughout the real world, not the Disney world, the real world. So how they train in Shanghai, in Hong Kong, in California, Paris. They're all actually owned by different people. They're not all solely Disney owned like Disney World is. So they do have the differences, but I'm really interested in that. And also how they change the design of the theme parks. As I say, I'm really interested in the design of the theme park and the management thereof, because actually that's a huge control mechanism of the guests, not just of the cast members. That actually a lot of the Disney theme park design is about controlling the guests at different parts of the day and pushing them around like sheep. So hopefully that answers your question, Alexandra.
Yes, brilliant. Thank you. Sounds great, actually, the two ideas. So good luck.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alexandra, and thanks, Claire. We have 2 more questions. Try first before Emma.
Yeah, hi, Claire. Thank you so much for your presentation. And your topic is about theme park Disney. I think Disney theme park industry has very characteristics. It's a little bit different from other organizations. So how to training or develop talents in theme park industry? You mentioned many methods, on-the-job training, coaching or something. In your opinion, which one is the most effective way to develop or training staff in a theme park? That's my first question.
Okay.
Yeah. The second
Do you want me
one,
to answer that one? Okay.
okay. Just two. The second one is very short. Due to the pandemic, and many organizations used e-learning or some virtual training or some creative method to do the training. In your opinion, for theme park industry, is it appropriate to use e-learning to do the staff training? Any challenges? Yeah, that's my questions.
Okay. So the first one, what do I think is the most appropriate way to, what's the most appropriate aspect of the training that I've described? Because obviously Disney use multiple methods. I think for me, first and foremost, it's understanding what the corporate culture is as a company, having a very, very strong identity. And then it's about living and breathing that corporate culture, which in turn goes to the standardization of training. So the idea that everybody, irrespective of their role within the business, understands that they are part of the bigger picture. They understand the strategic dimensions of what the organization is, but really importantly, what it stands for. And I think, again, that hasn't changed since the world of Walt. Is testament to that. And I think for me as well, it's really important, and it's something that I didn't get to touch on in the presentation, was that consistency in retraining as well. So often when we train employees, we train them within the first few days, first few weeks, and then we kind of let them go on with it. But we're not on top of them slipping from the standards that we've set, or indeed keeping up to date with changes in health and safety, changes in anything like that. Disney insists that cast members go back to the Disney University almost on a 6 to 8 weekly basis, and you'll go for different reasons. So some of it is about furthering your role. So for example, I went back to train on how to match wines with different meals and things, and I learned about different wines, so I did that. I also learned how to be a Disney trainer, so I could train other people, but again, I learned the Disney way. But then you'd also get sent back to Disney University for hygiene laws, and that would be if the state law had changed. So if Floridian law had changed on food hygiene, you'd then have your Floridian training and also your Disney hygiene training. And I can tell you now, the Disney training was much, much harder than any state training, because Disney always want to be the best. They always want to plus it, always have that added extra. So I think retraining is really important as well, that training isn't something that just happens when you first join an organisation, but it should be part. And again, that's what we're constantly telling our students, isn't it? About lifelong learning and constantly developing and wanting to enhance. And actually, there's so many different opportunities within the Disney company to do lots of different roles that by going back to the Disney University and upskilling yourself, that's important. Second thing about e-learning, it's really important. It's a really interesting thought. In essence, the content, I think, could be delivered on e-learning in terms of you need to press this button to make this ride go. Don't overload it with more than 5 guests and things like that. I think the reality of embedding a corporate culture needs to be done face to face, because I think in order to get that storytelling, but also to get that protected time and attention span of your new recruits, because we've all done e-learning. There was I saw a meme or a GIF or something online the other day, and I sent it to my friend, and it was these 2 old ladies in Vegas just pressing the machine like that on the, you know, the money machines, and they were just winning all this money. And the caption said, "Me and my friend doing a mandatory HR training where we're just skipping the slides through to the end to do the task." And the reality is everybody does that. You know, we don't really take it all in, because we've got emails open, we've got Facebook open, I've got the television on, I've got my son changing the batteries in his Xbox controller. You know, we've got so many different things going on, but actually if we're in the environment, we're surrounded by like-minded people, we're directly being asked questions, you can see that level of engagement. And you can tell, you know, like you can tell when you read a room of students, you know if it's going in, you know if you need to regurgitate something. They might pass the e-learning quiz, it doesn't mean it's there. So I don't think you can really replace that. Obviously, there's necessity. There's times of COVID where we had to replace things. And actually, you know, even today, I said to my husband last night, "Oh, I'm presenting in Scotland tomorrow." He's like, "What time's your train?" I was like, "No, from the dining room table." But before COVID, I probably would have been there today. So times have changed, but I think it's not a fix it. It's probably in emergency use only.
Thank you so much, Claire.
You're
Thank you.
welcome. Thanks for your question.
Thanks, Shara. And Emma.
Hi, I'm also presenting, well, not presenting, but speaking to you from a dining room table. So yeah, completely get that. I just wanted to say how interesting I found that. I'm also a bit obsessed with Disney World. I went a couple of years ago, then missed out because of COVID, going back this summer. So really, I think the observation about the right-hand side of the street, never noticed that, and now it's so obvious when you think about it. But one thing that I've really noticed is, so when we were there, we experienced some of the kind of pixie dust Disney magic that they do, like, you know, they exceeding the expectations. But I'm part of quite a lot of online forums where people will discuss these kind of experiences and maybe start to complain that it's not as good as it used to be, or back in my day it wasn't like that. And it's not really a question, it's just more of an observation that I think sometimes the customers almost ruin it for themselves by expecting everything all the time. And I think there's a really interesting research project in that, and I would really like to kind of speak to you separately, because I think you need a bit of passion about this. You need to get it. You need to get
it. You do. And it's really interesting. Actually, when Alexandra asked what I was looking at, one of the other things that I didn't talk about was this idea of pixie dust on request. And that's a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek swipe at them, because as I was leaving, so most of the time that I was there, whenever a guest or a table of guests sat down, we always delivered bread rolls and plates and napkins. They all got bread rolls, whether they wanted them or not. And we'd end up throwing loads of them away because actually people didn't really want that at lunchtime, or they didn't like the bread. So towards the end, in order to, as part of the efficiency, the safety, courtesy, efficiency show, they decided that bread would only be given on request. And actually, and that's what they'd say. You'd say, oh, I thought we used to get bread, bread on request. I can get you some, that's no problem. Let me just go find some. And actually, you're totally right. I think the pressures of the economic climate on the company have meant that they've had to cut corners and they've stopped doing certain things. Some of it is due to the economy. Some of it is due to safety issues. Because obviously there's lots of stuff that happens that people wouldn't know about. So, there's actually probably a few more deaths than is in the media. So that's why certain things have to change on rides, and certain things change and they go, oh, well, they used to be able to do that. Yeah, but someone died doing that. That's why they're not doing it anymore. But this idea of pixie dust on request is that are they withholding too much of the magic? But I also agree that the guests do spoil it for themselves, because, if you think you go for the first time, you have an expectation, it's exceeded. The next time you go back, you want that exceeded that's then you want more, then you want more. And even I'm guilty of it. And my husband's, I say, he worked there as well. And we're guilty of it. And, you find ourselves going, well, you wouldn't have done that in our day. Or, you're meant to, when you have a meal, you're meant to check back on the guest in either 2 bites or 2 minutes, whichever comes first. And like sometimes we'll get through our whole meal and go, 2 bites, 2 minutes. And we're doing 2 bites, 2 hours, whichever comes last. But again, there's also variance between the different cast members. And maybe that goes back to the typology that I was saying, that some cast members actually don't care. Some just see it as a job, and some just see it as, their placement of their university. They just think it's a glorified drinking session. To get so much money, it's made, there's not a lot of tax to be paying. It's all disposable income, because nobody's got a mortgage or kids or, a car or anything like that. It's all disposable. But how do any of those people on the forums know that cast member wasn't actually due to be fired the next day because they were such a poor cast member? Because actually, if you get fired from being a Disney cast member on the international program, you have 24 hours to leave the country because your visa is withdrawn. And the managers actually use that as part of their corporate control, that they'll say, there's a plane that leaves Orlando International Airport every 3 minutes. You could be on one. So so we I guess we don't know what goes on behind the scenes, but that would be really nice to speak offline about that, Emma, and see if there's anything we could pull together. I don't know if my email address has been put on the blurb for this, but if not, Christian can give you it. I'm happy for you to have that.
Brilliant, that's brilliant. Thanks very much.
No problem.
Thank you so much. I know we've run out of time, and I don't want us, of course, Claire is a very interesting person. I always call her CH1. So she's CH.
So you're CH1, I'm CH2. You're worthy of that role.
You're CH1. But it's great. It's great. It was a very great presentation. You can see from the feedback, everybody wants to stay, but we just have to go, because if we continue this way, we're not going to end. But thank you so much, Claire, for this. It was fabulous. It was great. It was very positive and very interesting and very engaging as well. And thanks everyone for attending. Thanks for the feedback. Thanks for your questions. And of course, Claire was happy to engage with you. And hopefully we're going to get Claire maybe physically in one of our campuses. Because I don't think we are doing justice to Claire by having her online. By the time you meet Claire, she's very, very engaging. So it'd be great to have her in.
And if you get me in person, Christian, I wear my Disney shoes. I wear my irregular choice Disney shoes. So I'm not on brand today. I've got a Dr. Zeus shirt on. It's all different Dr. Zeus characters. So I'm not on brand. I'm disappointed in myself.
Exactly. I thought you were going to be wearing red, Claire. I thought you were going to be wearing red. But
I have a red vest top on.
I know you like
red. Next to me.
Exactly. So that's Claire for you. But thank you so much. I know everybody has to go. Thanks for attending, and see you in the next 2 weeks. Thank you so much. I'll see you all. Take care then. Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye.